My parents left all their money to my young sister. After they passed away, she destroyed our family business and lost it all in gambling. Growing up, James always felt like the odd one out in his own family. As the oldest child, he had hoped to earn a certain level of responsibility and respect, but instead, he often felt invisible. His parents, Laura and Tom, seemed to be completely smitten with his younger sister, Emily. It was painfully obvious to James how much they adored her. Emily, just 4 years younger than him, was viewed by everyone around them as simply extraordinary. With her curly hair, soft voice, and charming demeanor, she effortlessly captivated their attention in ways James couldn't quite wrap his head around. He remembered a particular moment when he scored the highest mark in his math class. A big deal for him. After weeks of hard work and late nights studying, he was bursting with excitement to share the news with his family. He rushed home, ready to celebrate. But when he walked in, he found Laura at the kitchen table, helping Emily with a school project, while Tom was engrossed in his newspaper. "Mom, Dad, I got a perfect score on my math test," he announced, trying to hold back his pride. Laura barely glanced up, offering a quick, "That's nice, honey," before returning her focus to Emily. Tom didn't even look away from the paper. Emily, meanwhile, was busy showcasing a cardboard diorama for her third-grade science project. "Look, Mommy, I made a volcano," she exclaimed, and just like that, Laura and Tom were completely captivated, showering her with praise while James stood there, feeling his accomplishments slip away unacknowledged. As the years went by, those moments piled up. When James joined the school soccer team and scored his first goal, his parents missed the game to take Emily to a dance recital. And when he won an award in science, their only question was whether Emily could join the next year's competition. No matter what he achieved, it always felt like Emily's smallest victories overshadowed his biggest efforts. Birthdays were the hardest. On his 16th birthday, he had hoped for a family dinner or at least a small celebration with cake to mark the milestone. Instead, he came home to find his parents completely wrapped up in preparing for Emily's upcoming dance competition. There was no cake, no dinner, nothing. When he asked about it, Laura simply said, "James, honey, Emily's competition is very important to her. We thought you'd understand." But the next week, when Emily turned 12, the house was transformed. Balloons filled the air, a custom cake was on the table, and they threw a backyard party with all her friends. They even hired a magician. James watched from the sidelines, feeling a mix of hurt and anger as his parents doted on Emily, acting as if he didn't even exist. Finally, after years of feeling overlooked, James decided he needed to confront his parents. He found them in the living room, watching Emily practice her dance routine. Mustering up all his courage, he said, "Mom, Dad, can we talk?" Laura glanced at him but quickly shifted her attention back to Emily. "What's on your mind, James?" she asked, sounding distracted. "I just feel like you don't notice me as much as you do Emily. No matter what I do, it's never enough," he admitted, frustration creeping into his voice. Tom sighed, his annoyance barely concealed. "James, your sister has a special talent. We just want to make sure she has every opportunity to succeed," he explained. James felt his heart sink. "But what about me? I work hard too. I want your support and recognition just like Emily," he replied, his voice wavering. Laura set aside Emily's dance shoes and looked at James with a mix of surprise and concern. "James, we didn't realize you felt this way. We're so proud of you too," she said softly. Tom nodded in agreement. "We've been so focused on Emily's activities that we might have neglected to show you how much you mean to us. We're sorry." James felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you. I just wanted you to know how I've been feeling," he said. Laura reached out and gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "We'll make sure to be more attentive and celebrate your achievements as well," she promised. From that day forward, things began to change. Laura and Tom made a conscious effort to balance their attention between James and Emily. They celebrated James's successes with the same enthusiasm they reserved for Emily's, and slowly, the feeling of being an outsider began to fade. James still admired Emily, but now he felt truly valued and loved within his family. "She has every opportunity to develop it," "You're a good kid. You don't need as much attention," his parents said, brushing him off. That felt like a slap in the face to James. Did they truly believe he didn't have dreams, goals, or desires of his own? By the time graduation rolled around, the favoritism had festered into a raw, gaping wound. He had fought tooth and nail to rank in the top 10% of his class and snagged a partial scholarship to a good college. Graduation day should have been a moment of pride, a celebration of his hard work. Instead, it turned into a reminder of his family's indifference. Emily had a regional dance competition that day, and without hesitation, they chose to attend that instead of his ceremony. Draped in his cap and gown, James scanned the crowd for familiar faces, his heart pounding with hope. But his family was nowhere in sight. As he watched other graduates embrace their families, receiving flowers, hugs, and shouts of congratulations, a crushing emptiness enveloped him. When he returned home that evening, he found a hollow silence waiting for him. There was no acknowledgement of his achievement, no card, no celebratory dinner. Just a cold text from Laura, "We'll catch up tomorrow, sweetie." Emily was fantastic today. In that moment, the truth hit him hard. It wasn't just that they favored Emily. It was as if he didn't matter at all. College became James's sanctuary, a place where he could escape the suffocating weight of his family's expectations. For the first time, he felt a rush of freedom. He forged friendships with people who valued him for who he truly was, achieving success on his own terms. Each accomplishment felt like a small victory, free from the overshadowing cloud of Emily's achievements. He began to wonder why he had ever sought his family's approval in the first place. After his sophomore year, he returned home, hoping things might have changed. But the moment he stepped inside and saw Emily's awards and trophies displayed in the living room, it was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. They seemed more numerous than ever, while his own academic accolades lay hidden, forgotten. During a family dinner, Laura proudly proclaimed, "Emily has been accepted into the State Ballet Academy. Isn't that wonderful?" The room erupted in applause, everyone leaning in to shower her with compliments. Tom was practically glowing with excitement, beaming at Emily as if she were the only star in the universe. Desperate to join the conversation, James seized the moment to mention his own achievement. "I made the dean's list last semester," he said, trying to inject his voice into the celebration. Laura barely acknowledged him. "That's nice, dear. Now, Emily, tell us about the Academy's program." That was it. The last straw. Something inside James snapped, a dam breaking under the pressure of years of neglect. All he wanted was to be seen, to have them recognize the pain their favoritism had inflicted. "Do you even care that I exist?" he blurted out, his voice steady but laced with a fury he could no longer contain. The room fell into a stunned silence. Emily looked down, her face flushing with discomfort, but Laura and Tom were speechless, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief, unable to fathom why he would dare to voice such a thing. James felt a surge of raw emotion, the years of frustration boiling over. He had finally found his voice, and he wasn't going to let it be silenced any longer. Tom finally shattered the suffocating silence. "Don't be so dramatic. We love you. It's just that Emily needs more support." James's anger surged, boiling over like a shaken soda can. "More support," he shot back, his voice rising to a near scream. "I've been ignored my whole life. Everything has revolved around Emily, as if she's the only one who matters. You've never celebrated a single thing I've done. Not my graduation, not my grades, not one damn accomplishment." Laura's face twisted with frustration. "James, you don't understand. Emily is independent. She needs us more than you do." That was it. The last straw. James felt the years of pent-up resentment explode within him. He stood up from the table, fists clenched, heart pounding, every beat echoing the hurt he had suppressed for so long. "Fine. If you don't need me, then maybe I don't need you either," he shouted, his voice cracking with the weight of his emotions. He stormed out, ignoring the shocked calls of his parents, their voices fading into a blur behind him. That night, he packed his things with a fervor, determination fueling his every movement. He wouldn't come back. He returned to college, vowing to leave the hurt of his family behind, to build a life free from their suffocating favoritism. He dove headfirst into his studies, joined clubs, and took on part-time jobs. For the first time, he felt alive, as if he was sculpting his own destiny, something that no one could take away from him. Each success, each hard-earned achievement, was a testament to his strength, and he didn't need anyone's validation to make it meaningful. But the scars of his family's favoritism cut deep, and they didn't heal easily. He often found himself haunted by thoughts of whether they even noticed his absence. Holidays passed without a single call or text, deepening his belief that he would always be overshadowed by Emily. Yet, despite the pain, James flourished. His grades soared, and by his senior year, he secured a full scholarship. His friends became the family he had longed for, wrapping him in the support he had never known. When graduation day finally arrived, they were there, celebrating him with cheers and applause, showering him with the love and recognition his parents had withheld for so long. For the first time, James felt a surge of genuine happiness. He had crafted a life of his own, liberated from the oppressive shadow of favoritism, free to be whoever he wanted. As the years drifted by, the chasm between James and his family widened painfully. The constant indifference from Laura and Tom eroded any remnants of connection, leaving him feeling like a ghost haunting his own home. No matter how hard he tried to reach out, it seemed they barely noticed he existed. His achievements, once a source of pride, had transformed into agonizing reminders of his family's neglect and disdain. The distance became a chasm that swallowed him whole. Throughout high school, James had poured his heart into his studies, sacrificing time with friends and family to secure a better future. Each small victory had been an attempt to finally earn a flicker of pride from his parents. But every time he shared a success, they would dismiss him, their attention shifting back to Emily without a second thought. One moment burned into his memory like a brand. During sophomore year, he received the highest grade in his biology class, a triumph that had cost him sleepless nights and endless hours of study. He walked through the door, ready to share his hard-earned victory, his heart racing with hope. But as soon as he announced it, he was met with a flat, disinterested gaze from Laura. "That's nice, dear. But did you hear about Emily's dance recital this weekend?" Felt like a dagger to the heart. It was always about her. That moment, like so many others, solidified the painful truth. No matter what he achieved, he would always be invisible in their eyes. It was a challenging project that had kept James up countless nights, researching, writing, and revising. This time he had hope. He believed he had finally accomplished something that couldn't be dismissed. That evening, he waited for his parents to finish dinner, his heart racing as he gathered his courage. "Mom, Dad, I wanted to share something with you," he said, his voice trembling but determined. "I got the top grade in my biology class. My teacher said my project was one of the best she'd seen in years." Laura glanced up briefly, a hint of confusion flickering across her face, as if she wasn't entirely sure why he was interrupting their meal. "That's nice, honey. Good job," she said, turning back to her dinner and cutting her meat without so much as a second glance. Then Tom chimed in, but not with congratulations. "James, don't you think it's time to look into activities outside academics? Emily has her dance, and she's performing in the county recital next month. Maybe it's time you find a hobby too. It'll be good for you." James sat there, stunned, watching his parents completely gloss over his achievement and steer the conversation back to Emily's upcoming recital. The weight of their disregard settled heavily on him. For a moment, he contemplated arguing, asking them why they couldn't just say they were proud of him. But deep down, he knew it would only lead to another uncomfortable silence, just like all the times before. So he did what he always did. He swallowed his disappointment and nodded. From that point on, James began retreating further into himself. If his achievements didn't matter, why bother sharing them? He avoided bringing up his grades, keeping the certificates he earned hidden in a drawer rather than placing them in the family room like Emily's dance trophies. Instead, he spent more time alone in his room, immersing himself in his studies. A silent protest that no one seemed to notice or care about. When he joined the debate team in his junior year, he told himself it wasn't for his parents. It was for him. His school's team was competitive, and debating became a powerful outlet for his frustration and anger. He worked tirelessly, staying after school to practice his arguments, meticulously crafting each point. Finally, at his first debate competition, James won first place. As his teacher handed him the certificate with his name proudly printed across the top, a small glimmer of hope sparked within him. Perhaps this win would mean something to his parents after all. It wasn't every day that someone came first in a school-wide competition. He entered the house, clutching the certificate tightly, looking for any sign that his parents might be willing to listen. But as he walked in, he found Laura helping Emily with her makeup in the living room. It was dress as a historical figure day at school, and Emily was transforming into Cleopatra. James watched as his mother carefully applied eyeliner, cooing praises over Emily's appearance. The sight was like a punch to the gut. Here was his mother, completely engrossed in Emily's trivial preparations, while he stood there, clutching a symbol of his hard-earned success, feeling utterly invisible. "Mom, I won first place in the debate competition," he called out, hoping to cut through the noise and grab their attention. Laura barely looked up. "That's nice, sweetie. We're just getting Emily ready," she replied, her voice distracted, clearly more invested in her daughter's appearance than in her son's achievement. The small glimmer of hope extinguished, leaving only the heavy weight of disappointment. James felt the familiar sting of rejection, a sharp reminder that no matter how hard he worked, he would always be overshadowed. He turned away, retreating to the solitude of his room, the certificate now feeling like a cruel reminder of everything he could never seem to achieve in their eyes. James's father, usually absent from these kinds of moments, stood nearby with his camera, ready to snap photos of every second. James cleared his throat and held up his certificate. "I won first place in my debate competition today." Laura glanced over briefly, her eyes barely lingering on the certificate before she turned back to Emily. "That's great, James," she said, almost as an afterthought, then promptly asked Emily to turn her face for a better angle. Tom didn't even acknowledge him. In that instant, something inside James shattered. It hit him hard that no matter what he achieved, his family's focus would always be on Emily. He realized that no amount of winning, studying, or hard work would ever change that. From that day forward, he stopped trying to engage with his parents altogether. At school, his friends became his main source of encouragement, while his teachers were the only adults who praised his efforts. Home felt like a shell. He merely slept and ate there, existing more like a ghost than a son. As senior year rolled around, James excelled academically, racking up top grades across the board. His counselor urged him to apply to several prestigious colleges, and for the first time, he allowed himself to dream about a life away from his family. A place where his achievements might actually be recognized. He spent countless hours filling out applications, carefully crafting essays and pouring his heart into each one, dreaming of a future where he was more than just Emily's older brother. Months passed, and soon the acceptance letters began to arrive. James got accepted into a reputable university with a partial scholarship. The day he received the letter, he walked into the kitchen, where Laura was on the phone with her sister, gushing about Emily's latest dance recital. When she hung up, James said quietly, "Mom, I got accepted to State University." Laura looked up, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's nice, James. It's good to have options." Then, almost immediately, she launched into another story about Emily's plans for her next recital. That evening, as the family headed out to watch Emily perform in her senior recital, James made the decision not to go. He had attended every single one of her previous recitals, sitting in the audience and cheering her on like everyone else. But tonight, he just couldn't bear it. He stayed home alone, feeling like he had already left. When his family returned from the recital, they didn't ask him why he hadn't come. They didn't even seem to notice his absence. Tom walked in, animatedly recounting Emily's stunning performance with a level of enthusiasm James had never heard directed at any of his own achievements. Laura chimed in, agreeing wholeheartedly. As the applause thundered around Emily, The crowd hailed her like a young star, and James felt the crushing weight of reality settle over him. This was it, the final confirmation of his place in the family. No matter how fiercely he longed to belong, he knew he would never be their priority. Their entire world revolved around Emily, and he was just a ghost drifting in the background, powerless to change that. The months leading up to his departure for college were a tumultuous mix of excitement and heartache. He couldn't wait for the freedom that lay ahead, yet a part of him ached for a connection with his family that seemed forever out of reach. When the time finally came to leave, he held onto a sliver of hope that his parents might realize the void his absence would create. But when he announced his departure date, their response was disappointingly lukewarm. Laura asked if he would be back for Emily's big recital in October, as if that was the only reason his absence mattered. Tom reminded him to send his new address, but his tone was flat, lacking any real emotion. The day he left, they exchanged farewells in the living room that felt more like a formality than genuine sentiment. Laura gave him a quick hug, urging him to work hard and do his best, while Tom shook his hand with a few polite words about growing up and responsibility. Emily barely registered his departure, waving absent-mindedly as she excitedly chatted about her next dance performance. Stepping out the door, James felt an overwhelming rush of mixed emotions. Relief and sorrow tangled together like a storm inside him. It felt less like he was starting a new chapter and more like he was closing the door on the family he had always yearned for. He wouldn't miss their indifference, but the loss of the family bond he had always hoped for weighed heavily on his heart. College was supposed to be the fresh start he had longed for, a place where he could finally shed the shadows of comparison. Here, he could be himself without feeling invisible. He made friends who celebrated his successes, professors who acknowledged his hard work, and for the first time in his life, he felt valued for who he truly was. Yet, even amid this newfound freedom, the scars from his family's neglect lingered painfully. When he received the Dean's List award, the urge to call his parents surged within him, but he hesitated. What would they say? Would they even care? As the years rolled on, James built a life of his own, surrounded by people who saw him and appreciated him for all he was. But no matter how much he thrived, a small part of him would always wonder why his family couldn't recognize the same worth in him. Leaving for university felt like shedding an immense weight. For the first time, he was surrounded by people who knew nothing of his family's indifference, who hadn't already relegated him to the shadows cast by someone else. He had earned a scholarship, partly for his academic achievements and partly for an essay he wrote about resilience, a deeply personal piece rooted in years of feeling overlooked and undervalued without mentioning names. He hadn't expected anyone to care, but they did. And now, here he was, alone in his dorm room, relishing the feeling of being seen at last. Silence had haunted James for far too long, but the moment he opened his acceptance letter, a profound sense of belonging rushed in to fill that void. University life became his sanctuary, and he quickly adjusted to this new reality. His roommate, Ben, was the antithesis of James, an outgoing, curious business major who could charm anyone with his infectious energy. Unlike James, who felt like a lone wolf, Ben came from a large, tight-knit family and spent hours on the phone with his siblings, sharing stories and laughter that echoed through their dorm room. Despite their stark differences, James and Ben clicked almost immediately. Ben introduced him to his circle of friends, a vibrant mix of students from various programs, each with unique interests and personalities that colored James's world in ways he had never imagined. One of those friends was Claire, a psychology major known for her sharp wit and fierce loyalty. Her blunt sense of humor cut through the noise, and she had an uncanny ability to make people feel seen. Claire's background couldn't have contrasted more with James's. As the youngest of 5 siblings, she regaled him with tales of their chaotic family dynamics, where love and loyalty ran deep. Her stories were both wild and heartwarming, and she often playfully teased James about his reserved nature, nudging him to open up. In Claire, James found not just a friend but a kindred spirit. They spent countless hours together in the library, buried in textbooks or grabbing late-night coffee, sharing dreams and ambitions that felt tangible for the first time. No longer did he feel like a shadow. He had friends who genuinely celebrated his achievements, no matter how small. When he aced his first midterm, Ben and Claire surprised him with a small gathering in their dorm room, complete with a cupcake and a candle. The simplicity of it took him by surprise. Joy surged through him as he laughed, feeling a sense of acknowledgement he had never experienced before. Ben slapped him on the back and said, "Man, you're going places," and though it was a simple statement, it ignited something inside James. A flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could carve out his own identity. But as he settled into university life, his contact with his family grew increasingly infrequent and painfully formal. He sent the occasional text to his mother, reassuring her that he was doing well, or an email to his father detailing his grades. Their replies felt cold and distant, often veering into updates about Emily's latest accomplishments and performances. Never a genuine interest in his life. The first time he returned home for a short visit during holiday break, the painful reality of his place in the family hit him like a slap in the face. One night, while at home, James overheard his parents gushing about Emily's recent acceptance into a prestigious dance program. The excitement in their voices was palpable, almost suffocating. Laura exclaimed, "This is such a great opportunity for her. We always knew she was special." Tom chimed in, his pride unmistakable. "It's good she has something that sets her apart." Each word felt like a dagger, piercing through James's heart, reinforcing the bitter truth. Nothing he had achieved ever seemed to matter in their eyes. Returning to college felt like coming home. Not to the place he had grown up in, but to the life he had fought so hard to build. Here, he was not just James, Emily's overlooked brother. He was a person with dreams, friends who valued him, and a future that sparkled with possibility. And as he stepped back into that world, he vowed never to let the shadows of his past define him again. When James returned to campus, his friends enveloped him with genuine enthusiasm, their interest in his life a refreshing balm for his spirit. They spent hours catching up, sharing stories and laughter that filled the void he had felt during his time away, reminding him of the connections he had forged. As classes resumed, he channeled his energy into his studies with an intensity he had never known before, driven by a determination to prove himself. He excelled in his courses, his professors taking notice of his remarkable work ethic and diligence, seeing in him the spark of potential. One professor, in particular Dr. Edwards, became a beacon of hope in his academic life. Renowned in the biology department for his rigorous standards, Dr. Edwards was also known for his ability to recognize and nurture students who showed promise. After one especially grueling lab assignment, he summoned James to his office, his gaze sharp and assessing. "James, I've been genuinely impressed with your work this semester," Dr. Edwards said, leaning back in his chair, his voice steady. "Have you ever considered pursuing research opportunities?" The question struck James like a lightning bolt, electrifying him with possibility. Research had always seemed like a realm reserved for those with unwavering support, something he had never had. But here was Dr. Edwards, a respected mentor, offering him a chance based solely on his merit. After a moment of stunned silence, James replied, "I hadn't thought about it, but I'd definitely be interested." Dr. Edwards smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting with approval. "Excellent. I think you'll find it both challenging and rewarding. You have a resilience that's invaluable in this field." That conversation ignited a fire within James. He joined a research group, working late nights in the lab, immersed in the work with a sense of purpose that propelled him forward. The research team quickly became a tight-knit group, bonding over shared goals and the exhaustion that came with their ambitious pursuits. Sarah, a graduate student on the team, often joked that they were like a second family, a sentiment that resonated deeply with James. It was closer to the truth than she realized, as these friendships began to fill the aching void left by his own family. As months rolled on, James's connection with his family continued to wither. During a rare phone call with his mother, she gushed about Emily's triumphs in her new program. When James tentatively mentioned his research position, Laura responded with a disinterested, "Oh, that sounds nice," before pivoting back to recount another of Emily's accomplishments. Each conversation felt like a chasm opening wider between them, his own life becoming a mystery to his family, an invisible thread that barely connected them. One evening, an email from his father arrived with the subject line, "Important news." For a brief moment, hope flared within James. Perhaps it was something personal, maybe even a message of pride in his achievements. But when he opened it, disappointment crashed over him. It was merely an invitation to Emily's next big performance, accompanied by a note asking if he could make it. Not a word about his life or progress at university, just another stark reminder that, in his family's eyes, he remained relegated to the sidelines. By the end of his second year, James had carved out a space at university that felt like home, a sanctuary of acceptance. He had earned a reputation as a hardworking and dedicated student, one who was not just surviving but thriving. His friends were more like family than anyone he had grown up with, providing him the support and validation he had longed for. Claire, who had become a steadfast ally, often encouraged him to embrace the person he was becoming, helping him shed the shadows of his past. But even as he flourished in this new environment, a simmering ache lingered in his heart. The stark contrast between the vibrant life he was building and the indifference of his family weighed heavily on him. He wondered if they would ever truly see him, not just as Emily's overshadowed brother, but as someone worthy of their attention and pride. Each success he celebrated in this new chapter came with the haunting realization that his family's applause would never be for him. Claire became James's closest confidant, the one who boldly suggested he stay on campus during summer break instead of going home. "You have everything you need here," she said, her voice steady yet filled with conviction. "Why would you want to return to a place that doesn't appreciate you?" Her words pierced through the fog of doubt that often clouded his mind, resonating deeply with him. It was a realization that shook him to his core, and he decided to take her advice. That summer, James immersed himself in his research, pouring his heart and soul into his work. He spent his free time exploring the vibrant city with Claire and Ben, their laughter echoing through the streets as they discovered local festivals, tried exotic foods, and enjoyed late nights filled with profound conversations about life and the future. One night, under the stars, James finally mustered the courage to share the full extent of his family's neglect. As he spoke, he felt a weight lifting off his chest. Claire listened intently, her expression a blend of sympathy and frustration. "James, you deserve better than this," she said, her voice fierce with emotion. "You're worth so much more than their approval." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For far too long, he had measured his self-worth against the hollow validation of his family. But now, with Claire and Ben by his side, he was beginning to see himself through the eyes of those who valued him for who he truly was. He realized he didn't need his family's approval to feel accomplished. He was carving out his own identity, one that was independent of their expectations. As the following academic year unfolded, James embraced new responsibilities within his research team, stepping up with a newfound confidence. He presented his work at a university conference, the culmination of years of hard work and determination. When he received positive feedback from his peers and professors, it felt like a validation of everything he had fought for. Dr. Edwards commended him for his dedication, even suggesting he consider publishing his findings. In that moment, pride surged within him, igniting a fire he had long thought extinguished. One evening while studying in the library, James received a text from his father, a simple, formal congratulation on his presentation. The words were polite but cold, devoid of warmth or genuine pride, as if they had been written out of obligation rather than heartfelt sentiment. He felt a surge of disappointment wash over him but quickly pushed it aside. He responded with a brief thank you, feeling no desire to prolong a conversation that had become nothing more than a hollow formality. As graduation approached, James's life brimmed with plans and excitement. He received multiple job offers and contemplated continuing his research in a graduate program. His friends organized a small celebration filled with laughter and unfiltered joy. In a moment that felt surreal, Claire raised her glass and toasted to James, who finally found his place. In that instant, James realized he had indeed found his home away from the shadows of his family's indifference. He had carved out a life rich with respect, recognition, and genuine love. The wounds from his past still existed, but they no longer defined him. By the time he proposed to Rachel, he had been with her for nearly 3 years. They had met through mutual friends during his junior year, and from their very first conversation, he felt an ease he had never known before. Rachel was supportive and ambitious, her understanding of his family dynamics devoid of judgment or pity. She had come from a background that emphasized love and encouragement, which only deepened his affection for her. With her by his side, he felt ready to embrace a future filled with promise. A future he had fought so hard to build. Rachel hailed from a family where everyone was cherished, a place where love flowed freely without conditions. She never looked at James with pity or attempted to fix him. She simply embraced him for who he was. For James, this was a revelation, an experience of acceptance so profound it shook him to his core. It was the kind of unconditional love he had longed for but had never known. Rachel was everything he had hoped for in a partner. A fierce and intelligent lawyer, her compassion made her both respected in her field and adored by her friends. Her family was as warm and inviting as she was, welcoming James with open arms. For the first time, he experienced what it was like to be embraced by a family that genuinely cared. They asked about his dreams, his aspirations, and even sympathized when he awkwardly tried to explain his fraught relationship with his own family, carefully avoiding the painful details. Barbara, Rachel's mother, took to him immediately. She often called just to chat or to share a recipe, her warmth wrapping around him like a cozy blanket. She made it clear that James was like a son to her, and with each conversation, he felt a part of him thaw that he thought had long since frozen over. It was a feeling so foreign yet so exhilarating that he often found himself caught off guard by how much he craved their acceptance. When James finally proposed to Rachel, her family was ecstatic. Her parents began discussing wedding plans with him almost immediately, their excitement infectious. Barbara joked, "We're going to make this the wedding of the century." James was swept up in the tidal wave of warmth and love they showed, a stark and overwhelming contrast to the emotional chill he had known with his own family. As the weeks rolled on, James and Rachel carefully plotted how they would break the news of their engagement to his family. Deep down, he harbored a fragile hope, a faint glimmer that maybe this announcement would spark something in them, a flicker of genuine happiness for him. He prepared himself for the moment with cautious optimism, despite Rachel's gentle warnings. "Just be ready for anything," she said softly, squeezing his hand. "But remember, whatever they say, we have everything we need right here." They decided to visit his parents' house for the big reveal, a daunting prospect given the dwindling frequency of his visits over the years. Each one had grown more strained, filled with polite exchanges that felt empty and forced. When they arrived, the atmosphere was already thick with unspoken tension. Laura greeted them with a reserved smile, her eyes betraying little warmth, while Tom barely glanced up from his newspaper, offering only a curt nod. Emily wasn't there. She was on her honeymoon in Europe, basking in the extravagance of a trip his parents had eagerly funded, a cruel reminder that he hadn't even been invited to the wedding. After a few minutes of strained small talk, James felt the weight of his heart pounding in his chest. He took a deep breath, gripping Rachel's hand tightly, drawing strength from her reassuring smile. "Mom, Dad," he began, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions churning inside him. "Rachel and I are engaged." A heavy silence descended, stretching on like a thick fog that choked the air. James had braced himself for this moment, but the stillness felt like a physical blow. Laura's smile barely shifted as she looked at him, her expression unreadable. Time seemed to stand still, and he could feel his pulse quickening, the anticipation hanging between them like a fragile thread. In that moment, the realization washed over him. This was the moment he had long feared. No matter how far he had come, no matter how much he had achieved, he was still standing on the precipice of their indifference, waiting for the reaction that might never come. Laura nodded and said, "Oh, well, congratulations, honey. That's nice." Her voice dripped with a detached politeness as she glanced at Rachel, offering a smile that felt more like an afterthought. Then her gaze snapped back to James. "So, when were you thinking about having the wedding?" Rachel, sensing the chill in the air, replied, "We're hoping for a spring wedding next year. We want something simple and intimate." Tom merely grunted, barely looking up from his newspaper, while Laura continued, "I suppose we'll try to be there if we're not too busy with Emily's schedule." James felt a knot tighten in his stomach, a raw anxiety coiling within him. "We were hoping you'd be involved," he said, striving to keep his tone steady. "It would mean a lot if you could help us out. Maybe just a little bit financially. We're trying to plan something modest, but any support would be appreciated." Laura's reaction was immediate and dismissive, as if his words barely registered. She sighed, her frustration palpable. "James, I thought you knew we just can't afford that right now. We helped Emily with her wedding, and it drained our savings. You understand, right? You're independent. You've always been so capable." Her words landed like a punch to his gut, echoing every rejection he had faced growing up. "You know how much Emily needed our help? Especially with her career. Weddings are expensive these days." In that moment, James felt a searing wave of anger rise within him, boiling beneath the surface like a volcano ready to erupt. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the frustration threatened to consume him. "So you're telling me you can't contribute anything? Not even a little?" Tom finally glanced up, annoyance flashing in his eyes. "James, we did what we could for your sister because she needed it. She's the one with the real potential, and we wanted to support her the way parents should. You've always managed on your own." Those words struck James with the force of a sledgehammer. "Managed on my own?" he repeated, disbelief mingling with hurt. "Is that all I am to you? Just someone who can fend for himself while Emily gets everything handed to her?" Laura's expression hardened, irritation seeping into her demeanor. "James, you're making a scene. This isn't necessary. We're proud of you, but you don't need us the way Emily does." Rachel squeezed his hand, her silent support grounding him as a tide of anger and betrayal surged within him. "You know what, Mom? Dad," he said, his voice steady but charged with conviction. "This is the last time I'll be your afterthought, the one you think doesn't need support or love. I've tried so hard to make you see me, to make you proud. But it's clear nothing I do will ever be enough." Tom rolled his eyes, dismissing him with a wave. "James, don't be so dramatic." That was it, the final insult. James felt his composure snap, the dam bursting. "Dramatic? You have no idea what it's like to be ignored, belittled, and cast aside by your own family." He stood, pulling Rachel up with him, the weight of his anger lifting. "We don't need anything from you. We have everything we need without your help." Laura looked at him, her expression a mix of stunned disbelief and annoyance. "Well, if that's how you feel, maybe it's best you focus on your own life and let us handle ours." James nodded, feeling an overwhelming surge of liberation mingled with sadness. "Yes, maybe that's for the best." He turned and walked out, holding Rachel's hand tightly as they left the house. For the first time, he felt a profound sense of finality wash over him. He had tried everything, given them countless chances to be a part of his life, to support him, to show him love. But now he understood. It was time to let go. He was finally free to step into the life he had fought so hard to build, unencumbered by the shadows of his past. James had longed for the love his family had never given, but now, with stark clarity, he recognized the painful truth. They were never going to change. When he returned to their apartment, he was enveloped in silence, lost in a whirlwind of thought. Rachel sensed the storm brewing within him and sat beside him, wrapping him in a warm, comforting embrace. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her voice soft yet filled with conviction. "You stood up for yourself, and that takes incredible strength." James nodded, a tumult of relief and heartbreak swirling inside him. "I just don't understand how they could not care," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of his confusion and sorrow. Rachel pulled him closer, her presence a grounding force. "Sometimes family isn't defined by blood, James. You have people who love you, who truly value you, and I'm one of them." Her words wrapped around him like a lifeline, offering solace in the aftermath of his family's rejection. In the weeks that followed, The absence of his family became both a profound void and a surprising relief. He hadn't realized how much energy he had expended trying to win their approval, desperately hoping for validation that would never materialize. Now, as he focused on planning his wedding with Rachel, a sense of freedom washed over him, an exhilarating release that infused each day with newfound purpose and possibility. Barbara and her husband, Rachel's parents, enveloped James in an even deeper sense of love and commitment after hearing about his family's reaction. They didn't hesitate to offer help with the wedding expenses, diving into the planning with an enthusiasm that filled the gaping hole left by his own parents' indifference. Barbara's excited texts about flower arrangements, venues, and catering options flooded his phone, her joy radiating and making him feel like he truly belonged for the first time. One evening, Barbara invited him over for dinner, her warmth and kindness palpable. As they sat together, she handed him a small, exquisitely wrapped box. His heart raced as he opened it, revealing an heirloom family ring, glimmering softly in the light. "I know it's usually given by blood," she said gently, her eyes sparkling with sincerity, "but you are as much a part of our family as anyone. We want you to feel that in your heart." Tears welled in James's eyes, threatening to spill over. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about the love and acceptance he had finally found with Rachel's family. On the day of his wedding to Rachel, everything he had ever dreamed of unfolded before him. An oasis of joy surrounded by friends and family he had chosen. Standing at the altar, he looked out at the faces of those who truly loved him, who valued him for who he was, and a profound sense of peace washed over him. There were no empty seats for his parents or Emily. He hadn't even sent them an invitation. That chapter of his life was irrevocably closed, and the weight of that realization was liberating. After the ceremony, Barbara enveloped him in a tight embrace, her eyes shining with pride. "Welcome to the family, James," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We love you, and we're so proud of the man you've become." In that moment, a genuine smile broke across James's face, a smile filled with warmth and acceptance. For the first time, he felt truly seen and valued, not as someone's afterthought but as a man worthy of love and respect. He had finally discovered where he belonged. As James and Rachel began planning their wedding, they envisioned a day overflowing with joy, authenticity, and the warmth of true connections. After the excruciating encounter with his parents, he knew he couldn't include them in this day. The decision to exclude his family weighed heavily on him, but it felt right. There would be no forced smiles or hollow congratulations, just genuine support from people who cherished him and his happiness. When he shared his decision with Rachel, she wrapped him in a reassuring embrace, her eyes shining with understanding. "It's our day, and we deserve only happiness," she said softly, her words a balm to his wounded heart. James felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over him, reaffirming that he had finally made the right choice. In that moment, he knew he was ready to step boldly into his future, unburdened by the chains of his past.
Bye bye.